Charles, and welcome everyone to this session. And like many of you, although I don't want to speak for all of you, I know Aadhar largely through the various controversies around it. So I thought it is a good opportunity to come from that point of view and ask Charles to explain. I mean, we may get into the controversies later on, but to explain to begin with what Aadhar was intended to be and what it could still be as part of its design, which is also one of the main points of his book, which explains the origin of Aadhar, how it was designed, what it was conceived to be. So I thought, Charles, if you could just explain what it was supposed to be.
So in the first instance, let me first thank all of you. And I must confess upfront to being intimidated both by Professor Gyan Prakash for that kind of impeccable credentials he comes with, and I had a lovely conversation with him in the morning. And I must also admit to being intimidated sitting here, because the last time I was at a Lit Fest was in Bangalore on the theme. And I was greeted everywhere with posters, including in the urinals, wherever I went, which said that, "Destroy Aadhar." And I didn't know what hit me. And so the very fact that I could go to a urinal and not be meted with a poster which says "Destroy the Aadhar," and everyone has been kind and welcoming, and because this is my home city and I'm a Mumbaikar, thank you so much. So that kind of reduces a little bit of pressure, so to speak. So having said that, let me first articulate my, upfront. I just want to make two submissions to you. Number one, I object to the use of the word Aadhar card, because not for anything else, because there is no such thing called an Aadhar card. If anybody tells you that, that's not true. What we have is an identity number. Aadhar is an identity number. So that's what it is. We'll get down to the nitty-gritties of that. And the second thing is, everywhere I am constantly asked, are you pro-Aadhar or are you anti-Aadhar? Is Aadhar political utopia or is this dystopia? And I am compelled and forced to take a stance. And my submission everywhere is that the truth, as always, is very nuanced. I certainly do not belong to the destroy Aadhar camp. I think that this is a great system. This is terrific. And I would go to the extent of saying that this is perhaps one of the best things that contemporary India has accomplished. And I'm happy to discuss that in more detail. The equivalent of putting a man on the moon for the US. Unfortunately, the kind of coverage that it has received for various reasons have been distorted, and everyone has taken their positions. There are people who are pro-Aadhar and there are people who are anti-Aadhar, and that's where the story stands, as things are. But in the larger scheme of things, that's not how it is. So what is Aadhar really? So let me just try and put it into a nutshell. Of all the people, of all of you sitting in this room here, can we have a show of hands here? How many of you have some kind of an identity document on hand? Any kind of identity document on hand. Okay? Very interesting. Now, what if I told you that all of us in this room, sitting here, and who have an identity document, are part of this country called India A, and we are just about 100 million people who have some kind of identity. Then there are two other Indias. There's another India called India B, which has about 400 to 500 million people who have some kind of identity which can be duplicated. It could be a PAN number, it could be a driving license, it could be anything. You could create a duplicate of that, whatever. You could have multiple identities. Sir, what's your name, sir? Yes, sir.
Satish Kulkarni.
I'm sorry?
Satish Kulkarni.
Satish Kulkarni. So, in theory, Mr. Satish Kulkarni could have a PAN card which says Satish Kulkarni, and which is what the income tax authorities insist that you have. And when you go to the RTO, the gentleman there may ask, what is your father's name? I want your father's name there as well. So, sir, what is the name in your driving license, if I may ask?
I have Gopal name. Satish Gopal Krishna Kulkarni.
Now, is that uniform across all your documents? Is that a problem?
Yeah.
That's a problem, am I right? Now here's where we're coming to we're coming to a problem here, okay? Now Satish Kulkarni could be Satish Gopal Kulkarni or Gopal Satish Kulkarni, or as the case may be. He could have multiple identities. Now you can hoodwink the authorities. Now let's make a slight distinction here. Mind you, this is a very subtle distinction. Your PAN card allows you to pay, makes you identifiable to the tax authorities. Your driving license allows you to drive a car. But these are accessible only to all of us in India A. In India B, we Indians, we are jugadu types. हम लोग कुछ भी कर लेंगे, टैक्स बचाने के लिए हम लोग कुछ भी करेंगे. तो हमारे पास 2 PAN card is, that is kind of not unheard of. I think practically our chartered accountants, everyone kind of, sir, आप 2 PAN card बना लो, 100-200 रुपए लग जाएंगे, ठीक है. Now, तो हम लोग कर लेते हैं. इसमें क्या है? What's the big deal? We do it. That's part of our life. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Let's be real about this. Come on. I mean, there's no jokes about it. I'm being blunt about this. Okay. So we may or may not have some kind of. Okay. So these are functional identities. And then there is another third country called India C. Now the population of this country, remember we are a country of 1.3 billion people as things stand. Okay? These people who live below the poverty line may or may not have an identity, may or may not have any form of identity. To the extent that between my co-author Ramnath, who is based out of Bangalore, we actually found cases where we ask people, and I was sharing with Gyan Prakash earlier today, examples, आपका नाम क्या है? सब लोग मुझे छोटे करके बुलाते हैं. अच्छा. Now please, for a moment, take the import of that thing, that this poor guy does not know what his name is. सब लोग मुझे छोटे करके बुलाते हैं, as in that is what people call him. So he is identified as the person someone calls him by. Now, this is a problem that has to be resolved. Because at the end of the day, let's face it, it is not that India does not have the money. We, at the central government, allocates budgets. We allocate resources that it should be targeted, it should reach the poorest of the poor. But we have and we have evidence which suggests that out of every 1 rupee that is intended to reach the poor, just about 13 paise actually reaches the intended recipient. Now, who takes away the other money? Who takes away the other monies? Now, do you know that if Chote has to get his, what is intended for him, he has to go and place himself as bonded labor somewhere. So the India you and I live in, we also live in a country where there is slavery. How do we resolve this? There clearly has to be a way out. We have to begin some way. And that is where we start thinking up something, and that's where we start to create a foundational identity. That is, you start giving everybody a unique identity number, a UID, so to speak. And that is the genesis of this whole thing, okay? So, is this a technical solution? Is this a technology-driven solution? Is this a political solution? Is this a social solution? It lies at the intersection of everything. And if this problem can be resolved in India, if a solution to this can be found in India, this is the kind of solution that can be exported to other parts of the world. It can be taken to other developing countries. And because there are other countries which are searching for answers to problems like this. So Aadhar, so to speak, tries to confer a uniform identity to every unique Indian, to every citizen. But it is not a proof of citizenship. It is only a proof of identity. Anyone who is a resident in this country gets it. Now, there have been multiple political issues, multiple controversies. I'm happy to get into all of that. But essentially, it just started out with trying to resolve how do I provide everybody with a unique identity number so that the poorest of the poor start gaining from it. The intended recipient gets it. That's where it all started out from.
If I can just take up that example, that very telling example that you gave, and of Chote. Log mujhe Chote kehte hain. So you said that he has no identity, that his identity is dependent on others. The others give him identity. Let me submit to you that it's not as if he doesn't have identity, but he has an identity which is part of a social network. He lives in a village, and he acquires his identity, his place in society, through a relationship with other people, maybe elders in the village and so on. That's a different kind of identity. You are talking about an identity that is recognizable by the state. Okay? The state wants everyone to have a unique number, a unique identity. Okay? So it's not as if he doesn't have an identity. He doesn't have an identity that is recognizable by the state. Now, could one say that if you institute an identity which is only legible by the state, could one see down the road that that state mandated or state legible identity erases other forms of identity and other forms of social being that Chote has?
So there are multiple issues out here. So in the first instance, the identity we have at home, for instance, is what we have at home. At home, what my wife calls me, what my mother calls me, what my brothers call me, what everyone around calls me. हमारे गांव में जो बुलाते हैं हमको, जिस नाम से पुकारते हैं, is one thing. The moment we step out of that network, and as we realize India is a very complex country, you cannot live in that particular village. You have to move out to look for a job. Now, somebody has to take up the onus of creating a foundational identity. And let me put that in perspective, okay? Once upon a time, in the developed world, there were no roads. The mandate was on the state, on the government, to create physical infrastructure like roads. India is a young country. We just got our independence. In relative terms, if you know what I mean. You're a historian, and I'm sure you will appreciate this more than I will. And we have not built infrastructure. And we have to kind of push ourselves out of poverty. We have to get out of poverty. And there is a new kind of infrastructure that is needed. And the most viable infrastructure that is staring us on the face is a digital infrastructure that will help India leapfrog. Because what is happening around us is that the world is moving into a different orbit altogether. And we need to create that kind of an infrastructure so that our citizens, our Indian residents, have mobility, can go. Right now, for lack of identity, you're confined to wherever you are. And that seems to be the problem. So us sitting in an urban place and criticizing a system, and please bear in mind, by no means am I suggesting that this is the perfect system. The system has flaws. It certainly has flaws, but it is an evolving system. We did not have perfect roads. The perfect car was not built overnight. Perfect roads were not built overnight. All this takes time, but you got to give it a try.
We'll come back to this maybe
Sure.
if we have chance later on, because I do want to explore this question relating to even the word Aadhar, the foundation, a foundational identity. When something is foundational, does that impinge on other forms of identity that we may have? Like you were giving examples, you're known at your home as, as a brother, as a son, as a husband, and so on. There are other kinds of identities, but that we need an identity that is legible to the state, and that's where Aadhar comes in, right? But when Aadhar claims to be a foundational identity, obviously it claims a privileged place in all the range of identities that we do have.
A counter question to that.
Okay.
You reside in the United States. How many people here are, may I have a show of hands, how many people live in the West? Any Western citizens? Okay, I see one show of hand, 2, 3. Okay, okay. Uh, just one question. Do you take a is a social security number mandatory?
I think if it is mandatory if you want any services, if you want a job, if you want a driver's license, if you require any of these services as a citizen or as a resident of the country, you would need a social security card number.
Sir, which part of the world are you from? You, sir. You raised your hand. Yes, sir.
Anthony.
So you're from the United States. Do you have a may I ask a question of you? Do you like or dislike the idea of a social security number? I understand there are problems with the social security number as it exists right now, but just curious to know, have you taken that for granted?
I have an ambivalent relationship with it.
I'm sorry?
I'm ambivalent.
You're ambivalent.
Yeah.
Okay. He's ambivalent about it. So you're okay, but it is mandatory for you. The debate on that is over, right?
Yes.
So my limited submission is that if you need access to all these services, yes, it has to be linked to a foundational identity. My problem, however, and I'm jumping the gun on this to answer your question, is that it moved too fast. It has moved too fast. The original creators, the people who thought this up, say for instance in the conversations that I used to have with, while working on this book, in the conversations that I engaged with the founding team, which included, say, Nandan Nilekani, and some of the very, very colorful people from the government. I can take some of the names like Aadhar Sharma, for instance, who's a bureaucrat. Very colorful people. Or Ashok Pal Singh, who runs India Post, for instance. All of them had made it, very clear that at no point should this be a mandatory kind of a thing. Now, I don't know, for the life of me, I am completely lost. And I don't know why is it that you and I are always pinged by telecom companies and by banks and by everybody else, which keep asking that, when that, you should link your Aadhar to this, otherwise we are going to disconnect it, otherwise we're going to disconnect it, otherwise we're going to disconnect it. When did this happen? We don't know, because the founding team, that was not the founding team's intent. That was not the founding team's vision. The founding team was at work to create to create a system, to create this foundational identity so that it reaches out to the people who don't have an identity. And once it reaches a critical mass, period of time, it will get accepted. But it's got to move at a certain pace. It's just that it moved too fast. Too many people wanted credit for it. Too many people impinged upon it. And it is inevitable then that society will, at some point, there will be a lot of people who will not like it. And I have a fundamental problem with that. Yes, so the ambivalence there, I understand that ambivalence. In fact, I would also disagree with that. I would hate something being thrust down my throat.
Okay, so one of the interesting things in the book that you do is an account of how Aadhar was initially designed and the collaboration between technologists and the bureaucracy. And you mentioned some very interesting characters. You mentioned Aadhar Sharma, but also Nanavati and Ganga, who sit in one small room in 2010 designing this system. Could you say something about what their vision was and what is the kind of a plan that they came up with?
So, what is interesting is that the founding team, I thought, was a bunch of idealists. You know, they were very passionate people. And I remember, for instance, meeting Mr. R.S. Sharma, for instance, who is the current, the current chairman of TRI. He's just going to retire right now. And I remember walking into his office, the typical bureaucrat whom we remember. And he looked at me and my co-author and very sternly as, yeah, and I have a picture of bureaucrats, as all of us do. And he looked and he said, and I said, okay. All of us are like a regular people. Then finally, I don't know what clicked in my head, you have this journalist instinct, something, and I just told him, sir, aap to bade dabang lagte ho. And that's when he broke into a laugh, and turns out that he's a Salman Khan fan. Okay, and Dabang was a movie that that kind of resonated with him, and that kind of clicked a chord, and then he kind of opened up, and he liked Bollywood, and he could move things around, He understood how bureaucracy works. In much the same way, the Chote example that I gave you about, I mean, it was an eye-opener for me in meeting Ashok Pal Singh. If I were to tell you that if we go, it emerged only in a conversation with Ashok Pal Singh, who was, then with, who was first with India Post, and then moved to the UIDAI to set up Aadhar. That how can you deliver a letter to Chote? Because this man does not know anything other than his name. Chote is what people know him by. Where do you live? सब मैं वो पीपल के झाड़ के मतलब झुमरी तलैया गांव में पीपल के झाड़ के नीचे रहता हूँ. As in, in Jumri Talaya village, I stay under this peepal tree. And there's only one system in the world which can deliver it, and that is India Post. Now, how do you leverage all these skills, the power that resides in that, on the one hand? Then on the other hand, you have people who have come from Silicon Valley, who have worked with top engineering firms, and who insist on listening to, who insist on working with, they want to listen to heavy metal music, for example. There is one character who will not work without listening to heavy metal at full blast while coding, for instance. Now, in front of Mr. R.S. Sharma, if you listen to heavy metal, he's going to take your pants off. No, but the system had to be built. And, I thought it was a tribute to leadership at its best that something like this was executed and pulled off and managed at such size and scale. It's phenomenal. And to my mind, So there are multiple such stories and multiple such examples that kind of come to mind. So just to give you another example, for instance, if I were to just jump the gun. So this is just as a startup. But as you go up, the complexities start changing. And this is where the leadership challenges. I told you that this is a political issue as well. To give you another case in point. Okay. Now this project has been at the back of the Indian government's mind forever. Now, when Mr. Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, this idea was doing the rounds. In what form, how, nobody was clear about. It was only when the UPA government came in, when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, and UPA had a complete majority, that this project finally got the mandate, and it was Rahul Gandhi who reached out to Nandan Nilekani and told him to come join the UIDAI. And it took a lot of doing on his part because Nandan was clearly at the peak of his career. And what I found extremely interesting, now there were two kinds of politics at play here, was that Chidambaram was one of the persons who was part of the UPA government who was opposing this project tooth and nail. And then the BJP was in the opposition at that point in time, and who had promised that they will dismantle this project if they come to power. And leading the chorus was the primary opposition leader at that point, who's our current Prime Minister. Now, I had a chance while researching this book to meet Mr. Chidambaram, and I thought, I've got this man floored. And both of us thought we've got this man floored. And I can assure you, you have to be of highly superior intellect to deal with a politician and a lawyer at that level. And I was brought to my place. मुझे मेरा औकात दिखाया गया. And I told, very confidently, I asked Mr. Chidambaram, I told him, sir, when you were the Home Minister, you opposed this project. When you were in this year, you supported the project. Can you explain the flux in your decision? So he put it very clearly. He said, young man, you have a lot to learn about politics. So Ramnath and I, both of us just looked at each other, we said, what is going on, because we didn't know what to do. The man is, he looks grim and he's, very tough. And he said, listen, as a Home Minister, my job is to ensure the borders of this country are taken care of. That is why there's another project which was being taken care of. As Finance Minister, my job is completely different, and I could see Project Aadhar as the most effective mechanism. This saves a lot of money. This can put our businesses on a different trajectory altogether. And it was much the same thing with the opposition, because when Mr. Modi came to power, people thought the project would be dismantled. But the backstory to this is that he was the man, while even as he was screaming blue murder while in opposition, he allowed the project to go through in Gujarat, where he was ruling. And once he became the Prime Minister, the project has to go through across the country. But that's the nature of politics. And this is where you've got to appreciate the nuances of politics and bureaucracy. So what we see is not what it is. These are people who really know and who are really on top of the game. And we're dealing with a high level of complexity. And they understand why this project matters and why it is so significant for the country.
To begin with, I'm very glad to hear that Jhumri Tilaiya has had this long run from Radio Ceylon Binaka Geetmala to Aadhar, because my mother was born in Jhumri Tilaiya, so she is passed away, but she would have been very glad to hear that.
Incidentally, it's a name which came up during multiple conversations.
I know, Jhumri Tilaiya is always mentioned as the kind of quintessential backwaters, there's a story you tell about the tortoise and the hare. So tortoise being the government, slow moving but has an immense scale, and the hare, which is the startup, which has speed, energy, initiative, dynamism, and that Aadhar comes about as an alliance, as a kind of co-working partnership between the tortoise and the hare. So you have a group of technologists, and you have bureaucrats, idealistic bureaucrats, idealistic technocrats, designing this system. So in just thinking about it, I was reminded of a book written by this Yale anthropologist called James Scott. It's called Seeing Like a State. And that book is really about how in modern history, or modern history is replete with many schemes that the state has come up with, from urban planning to, you can think of all sorts of plans that were designed from above. And his point is that all of these schemes were seen through the state's eyes. And when the state sees the population, it sees it in a certain way. And I'm wondering, a system that is designed from the eyes of the state for Chote Lal in Jhumri Talaiya, Chote Lal's eyes do not matter here. I mean, he's only a recipient. He's a kind of a passive agent in this process. And I'm wondering if the controversy around Aadhar has something to do with the fact that it was designed by a very small group of people sitting in a small room initially in the planning for 1.3 billion people. And those 1.3 billion people have had very little say in the design of the system. So wasn't it, inevitable that such a system would run into controversy and that there would be a great deal of noise around it?
So, two parts to that, two answers to that question. Number one, that the full system was not designed in that small room. It was not just a combination, it was not designed exclusively by the state. It was a private enterprise and state partnership. Technically speaking, this ecosystem is open. Any one of us in this room can take the architecture, the technical architecture, and build anything on top of it. So today, you can build anything on top of that. So you're free. It's open source software, so to speak. Okay. So it's a platform. Anyone can come in, and private enterprises are reaping the benefits of it. So if we pay the lowest telecom tariffs in the world, we have this to credit for. So that's one part. The second part is that I am kind of that this system was a system is an evolving system. It changes over time. It has to change over time. It must change over time. Will controversies erupt? Most certainly it will erupt. And for that, like I said, who's got to take blame? The state has to take blame. The state, I think, at certain points, has been opaque about it. And it happened at a certain point. Once the founding team was out of it, there were, ideological stances. And I think people who were, people took, some very, very firm stances. You are then no longer wedded to the larger cause, but you are then wedded to the stand. And I think that is where the problems start. So my short answer to that, that either Aadhar is good, and then you find every kind of excuse in the book to argue that Aadhar is good. And then on the other hand, if Aadhar is bad, you find every kind of argument in the book to throw that it is bad. It doesn't work.
So let me ask you another question, kind of related to it. Can one imagine Aadhar being implemented in a society or in a polity that is not a democracy? So what is the place of democracy in either the design of Aadhar or its implementation? So you were saying, this morning that India could offer, let's say Pakistan, that here is this, you can call it whatever you want, but you can use this platform. Now, Pakistan, depending on who you ask, is not exactly an ideal democracy. So is it then a system that is that can work irrespective of the fact whether that particular polity is a democracy or not a democracy?
The way I see it is that it's a completely malleable, it's like any open source software. You can take it and extrapolate it and you make what you will out of it. There are flaws to be ironed out, there are glitches in it. It is for the engineers to figure out. It is for the policymakers to figure out what kind of guardrails do you build around it.
Okay, we have another 15 minutes, so we can maybe open it up. And
This room is too loud. For almost I can hear the conflicting thoughts. So I think we'll open the floor now for a couple of questions. Yes, sir, please.
You were very right in saying that all things are not black and blue, black and white, and some things are grey. That's what you basically
thank you.
meant.
I thought you were going to beat me black and blue.
No, I'm not. But at the end of the day, there's the issue of security because no system is impregnable. No,
Oh, absolutely. No
Yeah.
system is impregnable. I
so-
buy that completely.
So, what are your thoughts on that? Of my identity being compromised when I get an Aadhar card. If
Are
a-
you
a
on
day comes.
Facebook?
Yeah, I know.
Are
I
you
know where you're
on
going there. I
Twitter?
know where you're going there.
Are you on Twitter?
Yes.
Are you on Snapchat?
No, I stopped using Snapchat.
Instagram?
Yeah, sure.
Can you give me your Twitter handle?
Yeah, cool.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Okay. If you share me your Twitter handle, give me about 6 hours and I will tell you who your best friends are. And I can tell you the last time I used a particular piece of software which is freely available on GitHub. GitHub is a place where all software developers go to dump their software. And I used that piece of software, and I could tell you that Rahul Gandhi likes to wake up at 7 a.m. and Narendra Modi likes to wake up at 4 a.m. I could also tell you that both of them use iPhones. I could at that point try to tell you that Mr. Narendra Modi was trying to build bridges. While researching this book, he was trying to reach out to Donald Trump. And so this was much before the India-US talks began. And I could also tell you that and that the most accessible time to when it is possible to reach Mr. Modi is just before he hits bed, which is at around, close to around midnight. He sleeps for about 4.5 hours. He's a very, very hardworking man. So your privacy is practically dead. Let's give it up. And there are we have about 5 central agencies in this country. We don't really need Aadhar for that, So our privacy is gone. It's compromised. Let's face it. Okay. Is this impregnable? Yeah. So in much the same way, I can tell you, a lot more about a lot of our friends. The editor I was working for, I could tell a lot about him, and I cross-checked. So all of that was possible. So if this is possible, you and I can do it, then our central agencies can do a lot better. Who knows? I don't know. I'm probably being tailed. I might just get butchered outside. So.
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
I have a question for you, Mr. Assisi. Why have you not touched upon court rulings, including the dissenting judgment of Justice Chandrachud? You have not mentioned that at all.
Oh, yes.
I have read the judgments,
Yes.
and let me tell you that they are quite derogatory. All
Well-
right? And I don't have an Aadhar card.
That is perfectly fine, ma'am. In fact, like I said, I think the system
Not
moved too
mention
fast.
what the Supreme Court judgment was. You see, we've heard about the bureaucrats, the technocrats, etc., etc.
Right. Sure. So if I may put my 2 bits on the Supreme Court verdict, I think it was unfair to ask the Supreme Court to rule on this verdict, rule on the system, because this is an evolving system, and the Supreme Court can only err on the side of caution, and the Supreme Court has to take a stance where it will protect, but it cannot take a call on what is going to happen in the future. That is the role of the Supreme Court, and that is what the Supreme Court did. The Supreme Court is not about technocrats. They are not technocrats. They were asked to rule on what is in the here and now, and that's what they did. They did their job.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Mr. Gyan Prakash asked the question about the vision of the founding team. What is the vision today? What's the difference? Can you explain that to us? Because I didn't quite understand what the original vision was.
The original vision was to provide a uniform identity, a unique identity to every resident, and that it should not be imposed on anybody. That was made crystal clear from day one, otherwise there would be a whiplash from society, which is what we're witnessing right now. And that as momentum picks in, as momentum builds up, okay, people will voluntarily come in when they see the benefits of the whole thing, and eventually services will come in, systems will build out, and that it is going to be a long haul cycle, that this is not something that can be compressed into a short period of time. But what we witnessed, unfortunately, was everyone trying to press the accelerator. And that is where there was much collision. So the founding team was unambiguously clear that it should not be imposed.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
What do you see the benefit and the roadmap for Aadhar for the next 5 years, for the next government, and for the next 10 years? What could be the pros with regards to the benefits to 1.3 billion Indians, who quite a few of them are on the poverty line or below the poverty line?
Sir, right now,
Where
the
do you
way
see
things
it heading?
stand, basis the current Supreme Court judgment that has just been passed, it is up for legal scrutiny. It is a setback. I don't think there is any ambiguity on that. It has set Indian businesses back. It has been linked only to certain schemes. Government schemes. Okay. Is that the best thing? I don't think so. I don't think so. It's a setback for India. It has set India back by at least a decade.
Okay, we'll take one last question.
So,
yes. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hello.
Sorry.
This is regarding the example of Chote I've been bringing about, that Chote should have been involved. My question is, can Chote decide what he wants from man? And if it's in democracy, 1 million people start giving their thoughts, what is going to happen? And the second question is to your question, Gyan Prakash, is Chote's life better with Aadhar or without Aadhar? So what is going to be, in your view, that is Chote should have Aadhar or not Aadhar, or how his life would have difference? Because I could say that we are imposing Aadhar on Chote, somewhere taking away his identity. So I would like to have that question. How could actually somebody like Chote with that education can decide what he needs to do from an Aadhar perspective?
Imposition of Aadhar card on a person.
The first thing I'd like to ask Chote whether he wants Aadhar or not, and if the very design of the system, if is you suggesting that it was not supposed to be mandatory, Chote was not mandated to have Aadhar, but that if he wanted certain services, let's say if he wanted gas LPG subsidy, then he would have to have an Aadhar number in order to get it. Now, as long as it was just for that, I could imagine Chote agreeing to get an Aadhar number. But if Aadhar was then linked with a variety of other agencies like mobile phone number. I mean, I remember, I've had the same mobile number in Mumbai since 2000. And I started getting calls from Vodafone from 2016 onwards. Please link your Aadhar number, otherwise your connection will be disconnected. And the time kept changing, because the court case was going on, and then finally it was, and so a lot of my friends, now, I can't, I mean, technically I shouldn't get Aadhar because I don't live in India. But I'm here long enough, so like a Jugadu, I could also get an Aadhar card, but I didn't. So there was this case of an Aadhar number being linked with other things. Okay? Now, Charles is saying that that was not necessary, that shouldn't have been, there was no need for it. But why is it that once you have this kind of identity, like let's say in Chote's case, let's say Chote said, I want an Aadhar number because I want this subsidy. But then that was linked with a variety of other things. Then he will be in a situation where all the other identities that he may enjoy in society are being subordinated to his having Aadhar. So that's what I was suggesting, that if it becomes like a foundational on which everything else depends, then I think you've lost something. Yeah. Because you do have other forms of identity. One doesn't have just one unique identity, but if that unique identity becomes the basis for every other identity that I enjoy, then there's a problem.
I think we have time for one last question.
Ma'am, here.
Yes, go ahead.
Last question to Mr. Assisi. I'm a working chartered accountant, and I've gone through the pain of linking Aadhar to the PAN card, and I know the trouble it caused. So my question is to you, instead of adding one more card to our wallet, that is Aadhar, मतलब ऐसा कुछ क्यों नहीं खोजा गया कि जो सब कुछ एक यूनाइट कर दे, लाइक बैंक ATM, PAN, वोटर ID, ड्राइविंग लाइसेंस, ये सब कुछ एक कार्ड में आ जाएगा? Why not that, and why we added one more card in this Indian economy?
It's a very good question, and that is the whole long-term intent, कि अगर आपके पास एक आइडेंटिटी हो, right, कि अगर आपके पास एक आधार नंबर हो, okay, everything else is linked, and it happens over a period of time. ये overnight नहीं हो सकता. ये overnight नहीं हो सकता. We have to weed out duplicates. We have a underground economy. We have a black economy. I understand your pain totally. Yeah. Our GST structure, as you know,
exactly.
is so messed up. Is not funny. We know, as a practicing chartered accountant, you would know the number of slabs that came up, and all of that. 28 slabs. Was there any need for that?
Exactly, 28 slabs.
There was no need for that. Right. I don't want to get into the technicalities here.